Yeah, so I don't really know how to start this one, so I'm going to start here, in 1527. This print is called The Draftsman Making a Perspective Drawing of a Reclining Woman, and it's by the artist Albrecht Dürer. In it, you see the artist staring through a gridded screen in order to accurately capture the geometry of the woman's body. The screen frames the parts of the woman's body so that the draftsman can more accurately translate her proportions onto a two-dimensional canvas. I've chosen to begin with this image because it sheds light on the traditional treatment of the female body in art history. I've started with this image because the topic of today's video is going to be an exploration of the narratives, treatment, and traditions surrounding the female body and how it appears in paint. I've started with this image because the actual topic of today's video is Propped by Jenny Saville, which I will get to by the end of this video, I promise. So yeah, let's begin with this Dürer print. This print illustrates a common process in European art making. A male artist is going to draw a female model from life. The artist is going to transpose the image of this dynamic three-dimensional female body onto the sheet in front of him using the geometric squares that he views her through. By using the tools of the artist, this practice will ultimately allow geometry and perspective to frame the body in front of him. It allows the artist to wrestle a three-dimensional existence into two dimensions. If we probe a little closer, though, we're going to start to see some of the embedded cultural narratives present here. The window behind the model, for example, reveals a landscape of rolling hills that seems to reflect the curves of the reclining female body, while the man sits steady and focused next to his little potted, perfectly trimmed tree. So this print can tell us a lot about the ideology behind the practice of painting the female nude in the early modern period. The unclothed woman and those hills behind her represent nature, while the clothed man, using his tools and paired with a little potted plant, is civilization. He is the force that domesticates nature through mathematics and scientific inquiry, or political structures, or art, or whatever else you want to put underneath the heading of civilization or high culture. The man in this painting plays a civilizing role by containing and framing the female body within his sketch. Through this process of art making, the woman will become like that tree, controlled in a frame instead of a pot. Her natural dimensions will be trimmed to fit an ideal shape, just like that tree. Nature will be transformed into civilization. And this association of women with nature and men with rational contemplation and civilization has a long history in Western culture. Aristotle, for example, took a simple description of differences in the male and female body, like how men often have broad shoulders and women often have broader hips, to make a wild deduction that men grow upward toward the realm of ideas and that women grow downward toward the earth and nature. So through this reckless leap in deductive reasoning, Aristotle assigned the contemplation of stuff like math and science to the domain of men who can use those tools to constrain unruly nature, a category that includes women. And though Aristotle has had a lot of influence on Western thought, this is just like one example that I could have chosen of many. The point is, these narratives turn a description of difference into a position on a social hierarchy, and they have a long history that shows up in stuff like this Dürer print. And I promise that I will get to that Jenny Saville painting at some point. So under frameworks like those proposed by Aristotle and the long list of philosophers and politicians after him, men were responsible for giving order to nature, to take the raw materials of nature and build culture and civilization. And this had implications for the art world. Since this worldview has women serving as avatars for nature, the male artist's job is to take the female body and transform it into something civilized. This is just what art does. It takes natural materials and transforms them into beauty. A sculptor will take a rock and transform it into a statue. Artists take matter and give it form. So if the female form is nature embodied, then the act of giving that body form through art would be the ultimate act of civilization. Or to say the same thing, but much more clearly, as Linda Need put it in her study of the female nude throughout history, if art is defined as the conversion of matter into form, imagine how much greater the triumph for art if it is the female body that is thus transformed. pure nature transmuted through the forms of art into pure culture. The female nude, then, is not simply one subject among others, one form among many. It is the subject, the form. So under this particular theory of art, a painting of a female nude becomes a metaphor for art itself, a civilizing masculine force controlling feminine nature through rule and line. That's what the female portrait actually signifies. And there are a remarkable amount of stories in European art history that illustrate extreme versions of this process. For example, there is the story of the ancient Greek artist Zeuxis, who once attempted to paint the goddess Aphrodite. As his model, he used all of the women in his city, and used each of their best parts to create that goddess of beauty. Through his role as the artist, he provided order to the natural world. He took real bodies, broke them down into their constituent pieces, judged the value of each piece, and then assembled the worthy pieces into a work of art suitable for contemplation. The subject of that painting isn't any actual woman. The subject of that painting is beauty itself, and specifically man-made beauty. It's civilized beauty that improves on the natural world, like what we do with Photoshop. The Renaissance artist Leon Battista Alberti claimed to imitate this process. He explained that when attempting to paint a female nude, he too chose many bodies considered to be the most beautiful by those who know, and took from each and all their dimensions, which we then compared one with another, and leaving out of account the extremes on both sides, we took the mean figures validated by the majority of the ruled measurements. He's so logical, so civilized. This process, it has such order. But obviously, Alberti is ignorant of the ways that beauty standards change over time or vary wildly between cultures worldwide. This process is a fantasy of logic and order. It's pretending that something like beauty is static, objective, and can be measured or quantified and controlled by like an equation or a process. Fortunately, beauty and the human experience is more complicated and fluid than that. But more on this point later, when we eventually will talk about prompt. The important part for now is that art serves as one pillar within a broader cultural narrative that assigns men and women to particular roles. Men were viewed as the intellectual civilizing force, and women were viewed as dynamic forces of nature. And this narrative is constantly created and recreated over centuries by men who systemically keep women out of fields like medicine and the arts. So it's a self-fulfilling ideology. Men do science and art that propagates and justifies a narrative that culture is created by men doing science and art. These narratives of male dominance are based on differences described by the medical field and then reinforced by the arts. Women were barred from both of these fields, and this ultimately prevents them from challenging these beliefs in medicine and limiting their ability to create new representations and narratives through the arts. So now we can turn our attention to how art historians have dealt with the artistic subject of the nude, and the role that academia has played in propagating these narratives and cementing these social structures. Building upon the traditions articulated by Aristotle and then reenacted by Renaissance and Enlightenment artists, the influential art historian Kenneth Clark published The Nude, a study of ideal art in 1956. In it, we get Clark's famous distinction between the terms naked and nude. I'll let him explain. To be naked is to be deprived of our clothes, and the word implies some of the embarrassment most of us feel in that condition. The word nude, on the other hand, carries in educated usage no uncomfortable overtone. The vague image it projects onto the mind is not of a huddled and defenseless body, but of a balanced, prosperous, and confident body. The body reformed. This has been an enduring distinction in art criticism. The context within which a body appears impacts the way that it is viewed. An unclothed body will appear defenseless, vulnerable, and embarrassed. But if that body is represented in paint, transformed, balanced, and idealized, then it can become a nude. The subject of the natural body must, as he says, be reformed on the canvas. And this is why Clark is going to go on to claim that the nude is not the subject of art, but a form of art. The skill and form that the painter can use will protect the otherwise vulnerable body. Art can take the natural, unornamented sight of the female figure and transform it into an intellectual space of contemplation. The body is no longer a body or a subject. It becomes the embodiment of grace or virtue or beauty or whatever the allegory is. As viewers, we are encouraged to contemplate the ideas communicated by the body, not look at the body. Quick note, I have been and will continue to pixelate the images here to avoid YouTube's algorithm mistaking the nude for the naked and then age gating this video. Also, I will at some point get to that Jenny Saville painting. Promise. So I hope you see the connection between Clarke's argument and the old narratives of masculine civilization giving form to the raw materials of feminine nature. Under Clarke's definition, the body exists naked and without meaning, but art clothes the body in representation, which elevates it to the level of a nude. The artist can transform a vulgar, natural body into the site of high culture. It's the transmutation of the actual into the ideal. This, obviously, is built on the same foundation as Zeuxis and Alberti painting an allegory of beauty by transforming the real bodies of women around them. It's also worth pointing out that these distinctions are all made up. They're stories that have been told and retold so often that people mistake them for the truth. They're stories that take otherwise neutral descriptions of differences and then assign those differences positions in a social hierarchy. Like, this type of body is more fit for education in the math and sciences or the production of art, and this feature of the body is more beautiful or more desirable than that feature. Because these stories are repeated so often, we start to treat those stories as though they are reality. We begin to mistake the map for the terrain. The term in philosophy for this process is naturalization. In philosophy, naturalization refers to the process by which an ideology or belief is made to appear natural, objective, and self-evident, rather than the product of a social, historical, or cultural construct. This positioning makes these beliefs seem beyond reproach, as if they arise from the natural order of things rather than being shaped by human interests and power dynamics. This process operates within the formation of unrealistic beauty standards in the fine arts or commercial advertising, or in the scientific racism of the 19th century that tried to connect the skull size and skin color of people to intelligence, or the engineer that claimed in 2017 that biological differences explain the gender gaps at Google. And we can see how Clarke builds his argument for the naked-nude distinction on that same foundation. He assumes as fact that the unclothed female body is a state of nature outside of representation, and then art provides that representation in a controlled and civilized way. It gives the body a context or a frame. Clarke builds his understanding of nude portraits on the stories that he inherited from thousands of years of ideology, though he seems unaware that he's using an ideological lens at all. He instead positions his distinction as natural, objective, or self-evident. So how might we end this constant recreation of the same cultural assumptions over and over and over again? How might we untangle these narratives that have been woven into our social fabric through this process of naturalization for so long? Well, for that, we're going to need to find an intellectual project that aims to reveal and question ideological assumptions embedded into our stories, our images, and even our language. In 1949, Simone de Beauvoir famously began her book, The Second Sex, by saying, "One is not born, but rather becomes woman. No biological, psychic, or economic destiny defines the figure that the human female takes on in society. It is civilization as a whole that elaborates this intermediary product between the male and the eunuch that is called feminine." And in writing that, she calls out this process of naturalization. There may be physical differences, but civilization as a whole has built a narrative of the feminine separate from those differences. She makes it clear that the category of woman describes a position within society rather than a biological reality. And this category, like all categories, is restrictive. To fulfill the role implied by the category requires a multitude of different characteristics be present all at the same time. Kenneth Clarke's distinction between the naked and the nude depends on the assumption that the body can exist outside of social narratives and expectations that we already have for any given body. The nude for Clarke depends on the possibility of a naked body existing in the world neutrally. But that distinction presupposes the possibility of a body free from cultural significations. It ignores how, even unclothed, the body comes loaded with discursive meaning. Feminist art historians will claim that a body can never be naked in the way that Clark uses that word. Even unclothed, skin color, chest size, hip size, hair color, muscle distribution, and a host of other possible variations always already have cultural associations and significations that are constantly being negotiated. The social world, with all of its associations and inherited narratives, always exists before the body exists. They always exist before the painting exists. In other words, the body is always being represented. As Linda Need makes clear, the body is always produced through representation. The claim that the body can never be outside representation is itself inscribed with symbolic value. With this line, Need exposes the ideological lens that Kenneth Clark used and the process of naturalization that it depended on. Exposing these naturalized ideological positions is an essential part of the feminist project. So, as one might expect, feminist aesthetic philosophy tries to disrupt these entrenched narratives of the female form that constrain the definition of woman in society. To do this, feminist aesthetic philosophy will often advocate for art that showcases and promotes representations of women with a plurality of characteristics. If the narrative surrounding the category of woman gives that category a fixed position in the social world, then that position needs to be exposed as a fiction. A strategy for doing that would be to represent as many new definitions of femininity as possible, demonstrate how any attempt to confine women to a specific or fixed social or political position will fail because personhood cannot be contained. It cannot be fixed to a particular position and cannot be standardized. As the philosopher Irigaray once said, "We have so much space to share. Our horizon will never stop expanding. We are always open, stretching out, never ceasing to unfold ourselves. We have so many voices to invent in order to express all of us everywhere, even in our gaps, that all the time there is will not be enough. We can never complete the circuit, explore our periphery. We have so many dimensions." In other words, the frame can never be big enough to include all the potential experiences and characteristics that could define the category of woman. The circuit can never be completed. The definition or category can never actually be complicated enough. That quote from Irigaray comes from an essay published in 1980 called "When Our Lips Speak Together," which also includes the line, "If we continue to speak in this sameness, speak as men have spoken for centuries, we will fail each other. Again, words will pass through our bodies, above our heads, disappear, make us disappear." She is calling for a new narrative, a new vocabulary, and a language for speaking about the feminine. She's arguing here that narratives created by Aristotle, Alberti, Clark, and thousands of others have served to construct the social position of women, and that the only way to dismantle this narrative is to create a new language, a new perspective on history, a more robust understanding of the relationship between the body and the subject that experiences the world through that body. And now, finally, we can talk about Propped by Jenny Saville. Propped is a self-portrait produced in 1992 by a then 22-year-old artist named Jenny Saville. The painting stands 7 feet tall by 6 feet across. It's huge. And right away, you can see that the subject of this portrait literally cannot be contained by the frame. Her head, which is tilted back as she looks down at us, is cut off. Think about those artists judging what they considered to be the best qualities of individual women and then putting them all together when you look at this. Think about the advertisers in the 90s airbrushing away anything that didn't fit their idea of the perfect female body, the trimming away of any excess, the removal of any feature that didn't conform to the beauty standards of the time. Here, on this pedestal, sits a new language for painting, a new illustration of feminine potential. It literally pushes against the borders that have been constraining the category of woman for centuries. This painting uses the same raw materials that those other artists used in the past. It's an unclothed body represented from life using oil paint. The materials are the same, but the narrative is different. There is no effort made to trim the body to fit the mold of societal beauty standards or even to fit inside the already very large canvas. The model seems anxious with her nails digging into her thighs, but she also looks relaxed from the shoulders up. She doesn't fit neatly into one emotional category. She's both vulnerable and powerful. She's both exposed and protected. She's neither naked nor nude. And you might notice that carved into the painting are words that might first appear illegible. They're backwards. When the painting was first displayed, it had a mirror positioned directly across from it with the same dimensions. So when viewed through the mirror, the text reads, "If we continue to speak in the sameness, speak as men have spoken for centuries, we will fail each other. Again, words will pass through our bodies, above our heads, disappear, make us disappear." Sounds familiar? It's Irigaray's call for a new symbolic system to break the old sameness that has guided narratives of the feminine for centuries. The backwards text here, I think, serves at least two functions. First, it could be interpreted as a screen between the viewer and the subject of the painting. The words would be perfectly legible to the woman in the painting, so we can view those words as if they are a screen mediating our view, a screen intended for her rather than the viewer. And we can compare this to the screen used by Durer's draftsman from earlier. In that case, the screen serves the interest of the male painter, who uses the screen to control the female body with geometric lines. Here, the screen serves the interests of the model. The words are directed at her and serve to facilitate her understanding of her own subjectivity. In both cases, the screen, or the plane that mediates between the subject and the artist, can serve as a symbol for the ideological lenses that we use when we view a painting. By calling our attention to the surface of the canvas, these words ask us to contemplate who those lenses serve. Durer's lens served the artist, but Saville's lens serves the subject, who happens to be Jenny Saville, who is the artist. So there are layers of meaning here. She's like playing 4D chess. And the second interesting function of that backwards text displayed alongside the mirror is that it asks the viewer to literally turn their backs on the painting in order to view it through the mirror. The image inspires action in the physical world. Art historians like Kenneth Clark put so much emphasis on art being a contemplative act. A painting should inspire intellectual contemplation. It's something you do in your head rather than with your body. The nude should inspire thought, not action, contemplation of ideas, and so on. So by having her painting inspire real physical action in the world, it's like kind of just another slap in the face to Kenneth Clark and those old theories of art. This is a new language. Additionally, viewing the painting through the mirror, we have our experience of the painting mediated by two different planes, the mirror and the scratched surface of the painting. Our experience of the unclothed body then has to pass through two layers of framing. First, the visual, through the mirror, and then second, linguistic, through the words that are inscribed on the canvas. Physical observation and linguistic narratives will both affect the way that we view this painting, and the form of the painting calls attention to those ways of seeing it. It makes the ideological frames visible, a stark contrast to the process of naturalization, which tries to make those ideologies invisible by making them seem natural. As this painting literally says, we cannot continue to speak as men have spoken for centuries, or we will fail to fully see each other. We need to be conscious of those ideological screens that we use to comprehend and control our experience of the world. This painting is a modern classic. I encourage you to check out more of Jenny Saville's work. I'll put links in the description below. Thank you for watching.